If you're able just to kind of hit.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. Brilliant. Yeah.
Okay, I think we can go ahead then, Chairman.
All right, well, thank you all very much and welcome to today's virtual meeting of the Lincolnshire Schools Forum on the 6th of October, due to start at, well, 1 o'clock, but it's slightly late due to a few technical issues. My name is Gavin Booth and I'm the chairman of this meeting. Before we begin, we have some matters of procedures to mention. So, as you'll have heard, today's proceedings will be audio broadcasted and recorded. When you're invited to speak, please can you unmute your microphones and switch on your video. You may find it easier if you continue with your cameras off and your mics muted for the majority of the meeting, because that might help with the connection. If at any point you want to raise a comment or ask a question, please put something in the chat and indicate that you'd like to speak. And also, if at any point you are required to dash off and leave the meeting, if you can let us know again by putting in the chat that you are leaving, we can just make sure that's reflected in the minutes. If at any point during the course of this meeting you start having IT issues, then the suggestion really is then to hit the big red leave button and then try and rejoin the meeting and we'll let you in. If we're made aware that the meeting goes down for any reason in terms of its connection to the public broadcast, we will then kind of put the meeting on hold until that comes back online, and then we'll restart the meeting. And then I think we'll go back to Tom, please, just to confirm the presence of members and officers at the meeting. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'll just do a roll call. If you could say present. Amy Stancer.
Present.
Keena Adkins.
Hello, sorry, I just couldn't find my mic. Yes, hello.
Thank you. Alan Howe.
Yeah, good afternoon, people.
Tony Stevens.
Good afternoon.
Catherine Stratton.
Present, good afternoon.
Callum Clay.
Good afternoon.
Michelle Anderson.
Hello, everyone.
Rachel Barrett.
Present.
Joe Slessor.
Afternoon, all.
Professor Ken Durans. I'll mark Ken is present. I believe he's here.
Oh, President Tom.
Oh, thank you very much.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry.
Yes, we can hear you. Stephen Baragwana.
Present.
Francis Green.
Present.
Simon Pickett.
Present.
Daniel Callahan. We'll move on. Gavin Booth.
Present.
Lee Mason.
Hello, good afternoon.
Dr. Stephen Hopkins. Geoff Greaves.
Present.
Andy Watts. Julia Merivale.
Present.
Thank you. Peter Tomlinson.
Afternoon.
Thank you. And Heather Marks. Okay, I believe that's all members, Chairman.
If there's anybody else on the call that we haven't been made aware of, can you please speak up now and let us know you're here? Okay, that makes sure that, we'll go through. I think we've got a list of officers to go through as well at the meeting in a second, but no other members. Right, we'll let you do the officers then, please, Tom.
So, Mark Popplewell.
Present.
Thanks. Elizabeth Bowles.
Afternoon, everyone.
Eileen McMorrow. Martin Smith.
Good afternoon, everyone. Present.
Thank you. Tony Warnock.
Good afternoon.
Thanks. Geraldine O'Neill. Kate Capel. Sorry.
Present, hi.
Rosemary Acrill.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And do we have AD Clark at all? Okay. I may have missed some officers there, Chairman, but if you'd let that be known, please.
Yeah, if you are a county council officer and we've not mentioned your name, please put it in the chat and we'll make sure you're on the minutes. So we'll move swiftly on to item 1. It's a fairly packed agenda today, so apologies for absence and any replacement members. So have we got any apologies, please, Tom?
Yes, we have apologies from Katie Grayville and Simon Morley.
Okay, thank you very much. Swiftly on to item 2 then, which is declaration of members of interests. If there are any members of the Schools Forum that wish to declare an interest, can you please type speak in the chat function for me? Right, I don't think anybody's got a declaration of interest there, just the officers coming through. So we'll move on from that to item number 3, which is the minutes of the last Schools Forum meeting held on the 30th of June. I would like to propose the minutes as an accurate record. Do we have anybody prepared to second? If you could indicate that in the chat.
I'll second that, Chairman.
Thank you, Professor Durans. That's seconded. So it's therefore proposed and seconded that the minutes are approved. Is there anybody wishing to abstain from their approval? Or anyone against their approval? Okay, in the absence of any votes against that, then we will make sure that they are proposed as an accurate record of the last meeting. Right, item 4 is Chairman's announcements, and it's just to make the forum aware that the Council has taken the decision to continue using EMPSN as their managed network and has undertaken a process of procuring a new contract for the managed services activities. The contract's been awarded, and EMPSN are now engaging directly with schools and with the sector around broadband connectivity from the 1st of November. So this has been a standing item for some time. Obviously, that will now be removed from our work programme, and we'll continue with that contract with the EMPSN going forwards. Moving on to item 5, which I believe is on pages 13 to 24, which is a national funding formula for schools update for 2023-24. I'd like to invite Lizzie Bowes, Strategic Finance Manager, to present this. We're asked to note the contents of this report and to share any comments on the local authority's steps to ensure the national funding formula is affordable. Over to you, Lizzie.
Thank you very much. So the paper details the proposed changes to the national funding formula for 2023-24. As a brief recap, the national funding formula was introduced in 1819. Lincolnshire has replicated the formula since its introduction. In 22-23, of the 150 local authorities, only 78 replicated the national funding formula. Although Lincolnshire continued to replicate the monetary values of the formula in 22-23, members may recall, due to the increase in free school meals due to the pandemic, the minimum funding guarantee had to be set at the lower amount of 0.5%. The government have now conducted 2 consultations on further proposed reforms to the formula with the intention of moving to a hard formula. A report was shared at the April meeting regarding the first consultation. The second consultation was launched in June and focuses more on future years rather than 23-24. The key areas of change are detailed on page 14, including the setting of national notional SEN budgets, split site funding being determined centrally, and amendments to growth funding in regard to popular schools and academies. The local authority's response emphasised our view of the importance of reforms focusing on a zero-based budget approach to understand the true cost of schools rather than their current approach of redistributing funding using local authority averages. In July, the DfE announced their funding intentions for 23-24. The provisional DSG budgets are detailed on page 15. Taking the schools block first, this is calculated by aggregating schools' notional allocations under the formula with a separate rate for the primary and secondary sector. Lincolnshire's position has continued to improve, but is still below the national average. Key changes for 23-24 that will impact Lincolnshire include additional support will be provided for disadvantaged pupils by increasing free school meals every 6 and key factors by 4.3%. All other formula factors will increase by 2.4%. Minimum per pupil funding levels will again increase. Every school will be allocated at least 0.5% more of pupil-led funding compared to 22-23 baselines. The local authority will continue to set the minimum funding guarantee, but the range has been altered to between 0 and 0.5%. Schools' supplementary funding that was previously a separate grant will be incorporated into the main formula. Discussions continue as to how rates funding will be allocated. The districts in Lincolnshire decided in 2023 not to adopt a new payment method, and officers are waiting confirmation as to the payment method that they will choose for 23-24. Growth in funding will continue to be allocated on a lagged basis. Appendix A provides a comparison of the national funding formula factors for 22-23 and 23-24. The fundamental principles of the formula are not changing. The local authority intends to replicate the formula subject to affordability, which the local authority will not be able to determine until the completion of the authority pro forma tool in January 23, which is based on the latest census information. This leaves limited time for engagement with the sector. The affordability position will be shared within the January meeting, including any measures required to address any affordability gap. As the local authority intends to replicate the formula subject to affordability, support received from the sector from previous consultations, the minor refinements detailed in the paper, and the time constraints the local authority has concluded a consultation with schools will not be required at this time. Moving on to the Central School Services block, funding will continue to comprise two elements: ongoing responsibilities and historic commitment funding. Historical funding will reduce by a further 20%, and there continues to be a challenge to ensure a sustainable outcome is achieved for the PFI contract. Within the higher needs block, the provisional allocation has increased by 6. The consultation of the Green Paper are likely to have an impact on higher needs funding. As you'll be aware from previous meetings, we continue to witness a growing trend nationally and locally with more young people requiring specialist support, which continues to have a material financial impact on the higher needs block. The SEN Transformation Board is governing the transformational process and its key work streams. Now turning to the early years block, the DfE launched a consultation on reforms to early years funding formula in July. The proposals are detailed on page 19. The local authority had a number of concerns regarding the proposals, which the local authority is discussing with the department directly. We've also been advised that pupil premium will continue in 23-24, but rates have yet to be confirmed. The bottom of page 19 details the actions local authorities must take if their DHG goes into a deficit. So in conclusion, the funding announcements show an increase in per pupil funding for mainstream schools. 23-24 is the second year of the 3-year funding settlement. Although the increase is welcome, the local authority is concerned about the financial position of schools when we consider the proposed pay awards, utility costs and general increase in inflation. In terms of next steps, the needs will include undertaking financial modelling of school budgets to fully understand the financial implications of the funding announcements. A final version of the APT tool will be released in December based on the October 22 census that will be used as a basis for calculating schools' budgets. An update will be brought to the January meeting regarding affordability of the formula. Schools' budget shares must be published by the 28th of February 2023. Subject to affordability, the local authority intends to replicate the formula in 23-24. And as that stated at the start of the paper, the government continued to consult on moving to a hard formula. The government expect the move to a hard formula to be completed by 2027-28, removing the local authority responsibility in terms of setting budgets. The local authority will continue to respond to consultations, emphasising the importance of maintaining local flexibility. And the form is at the content of the report.
Thanks, Lizzie. I can already see people starting to put a message around questioning in the chat. I think that's the best way to do it because obviously with so many people on the call, we can't always necessarily see the hands up. So I think the first question is Anthony, please, over to you.
Good afternoon, Lizzie. Thank you very much for that. The question I've got is around where in the national funding formula does the pay award side come into it?
So last year, when we received when schools received the supplementary funding was to cover a variety of things, including the adult social care levy, pay awards, and utilities. Now, it's recognised that the funding that's coming via the supplementary route is not going to cover all those additional costs. We have had conversations with DfE colleagues, including at our regional meetings, where we've raised the concerns that we have about the fact that although, yes, there are increases, we are concerned about the fact that they do not equate to actually what is coming in terms of the costs. And at the moment, we're being told that apart from what's in the formula, there's no additional funding there. Now, there's a couple of things. At the moment, we know the NI reversal is going to happen from November. That will help slightly. And we've been told that the energy cap will also be applied to schools, but we're waiting details as to what that actually means in order to communicate that out to everybody. But as I say, that there are concerns about actually the income coming in compared to the costs.
Right. The reason I ask is I'm sure you're quite aware that in our medium-term financial planning across all schools at the moment, I'm sure there'll be a fair amount of agreement around the table, is that the proposed or the potential for an 8 to 10% pay award is being asked as part of our estimating, as part of that medium-term financial plan. And that is going to push an awful lot of schools into debit over the next few years. Can I ask what the local authority is potentially therefore doing about that?
One of the things that we're doing at the moment is, and absolutely recognise that point, and that is something that we're hearing from a lot of the schools. So what we are doing at the moment is we are working with the education team to produce a document in terms of lots of things for schools to consider when their budgets become tighter. Lots of things to look at, so benchmarking, fundamental reviews of all the budgets as a sort of a starting point. So to look at all those things to begin with in terms of where some savings can be made, because it depends upon the size of the deficits that schools might have. We will continue to obviously raise those queries with the ESFA in terms of concerns they're saying. It isn't just in Lincolnshire. A lot of the other authorities are saying exactly the same thing in terms of actually the situation that we are in.
Okay, Lizzie, thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Keena, please.
Hiya, Keena Adkins, head teacher of St Christopher's Special Needs School and representative of Maintain Special Schools. Can I ask, last time we had the forum, there was a discussion that mainstream primary and secondary had been provided with additional funding for the utilities issues that everyone's aware of. And there was feedback saying that special schools were going to be consulted. I understand that consultation is taking place. That took place in July. We're in October, which is halfway through the financial year, and we currently have got no additional income for any of the utility increased costs, whereas our mainstream counterparts have. So I just wondered what's happened with that consultation and what's the outcome for special schools?
Okay, so at the moment, I believe that we are still looking at all the information, and one of the things we're looking at is, of course, the fact that at the moment the landscape continues to be changing in terms of what the government are saying that information is for. I don't know if Mark wants to say anything else on that at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Keena. So yes, you're quite right. So we did the consultation with your schools, and obviously the supplementary funding. To give you that reassurance, supplementary schools funding for special schools will be allocated in the current year, so clearly backdated to the point. So the survey was undertaken. We're still refining some of that, but also it has a direct implication in terms of what central government are making decisions on. So the utility cap, obviously that needs to be considered as part of the refined modelling. The levy change, again, that needs to be taken out of our modelling. But also we're two elements of this was relating to the pay awards. Obviously the recommended teachers pay award, that hasn't been formally agreed at this point, nor is the support and non-teaching staff as well. So all these are being put into the model. And to give you that reassurance, yes, monies will be allocated, but we're just fine-tuning some of that. So hopefully we'll have an update to you shortly. And obviously we'll be then allocating that money to you relating to the full year effects of that school year.
Have we got an idea of when that will be? Because we are unable to financially project at the moment. We're sitting in a deficit, and I've just been provided with local authority, have given me information to say that our utilities for this financial year for electricity only will be an increase of £94,000. That will break the school, and that is a real cost that has come from Nathaniel. And I know that we're not the only school. We're sitting in a deficit already. we can't, our governing body can't be assured of our finances. We can't spend what we don't have. We can't wait for conversations. We are living it right now.
Yeah, okay, of course. I mean, we obviously have provided you that reassurance, and that's something that we will of course honour as part of this arrangement. And I think if you reflect on in terms of our engagement with the sector generally, it's very positive working with yourselves. You was part of the working group last year in terms of ensuring school budgets were reflected and updated, recognising those new costs coming out. And I think we all need to appreciate the changing landscape with costs generally. And what we felt was that exercise in terms of in the summer, in terms of understanding costs, those returns are showing different levels of demands and needs. So we're trying to consolidate all of those is not an easy exercise. But I would hope that within this month we should be providing something to you to provide that reassurance. So hopefully that sort of puts in a good position to then plan going forward. But as part of what the guidance we have issued is that if schools do, they can calculate their supplementary funding, albeit it may not be the actual sum they receive, but actually identifying those unforeseen costs, such as your teachers' pay award, and quantifying those. That way that can be then compared against what we would calculate to make sure that we've got that two-way conversation. So again, I'd recommend you doing that so you can identify those unforeseen costs that have materialised in the current year.
I mean, that was the consultation, wasn't it?
It was, but we've had to go back to some schools to have that refined. But I think what I'm saying is on that point is that from your governing body perspective is that you've identified these as the unforeseen costs, which were in addition to what the original budget share allocated. So you can if you're seeing a declining picture in terms of the financial position, or indeed into a deficit, you can justify and explain to the governors X amount refers to the unforeseen costs which have materialised in the current year, of which we have had a reassurance from the local authority that unforeseen costs will be recognised as an additional allocation. So hopefully that gives that, in terms of the governor reassurance, something that you will have some weight on.
Is it possible for a letter to be drafted to special school heads, boards, trusts, etc., that outlines that to reassure? Because I think there is a sense of uncertainty.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I say I've provided that reassurance in the past, and even in the Schools Forum papers, and it even references the Schools Forum papers at that point. But yeah, happy that a general communication goes out.
That would be useful. Thank you.
I think you're on mute, Chair.
Gav. Oh, sorry. Lee Mason, do you want to jump in there, please?
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to echo Keena's points. So I represent the specialist academies. So really useful to hear, Mark's comments and that acknowledgement that the landscape is shifting, and we're all very aware of that. But again, in terms of that context, just say we were informed yesterday to be prepared for our rising energy costs for 300%, which is extortionate. So it is reassuring to hear those comments, and just to echo Keena, something from the local authority that we can then share with our boards and our governors to support that confidence that though some of that funding will be coming forward would be really helpful.
Great, thank you. And I see Steve's put in the chat here around just a general concern around the funding of schools, and I think we've all got a duty to continue, not just the local authority, but all of those in our representative sectors, to continue to put pressure on powers that be to understand the depths of the difficulties around funding that we're all facing at this point in time, and that's without anything hard and fast on pay rises, etc. So whatever we can do and whoever we can tell, I think we need to be making sure that we are pushing that message far and wide, because I saw some of you saw messages in the press about schools having to make do with what they've got and potential further public service cuts. Well, you know, we can't sustain any further public service cuts in real terms. So, Josh, do you want to come in there, please?
Thank you, Chair. It was just picking up on one point from the discussion between Keena and Mark there, and I'm conscious we're going into a level of detail that perhaps isn't strictly for the forum, but just given it's been discussed here, it was just around the supplementary grant and the impact on special and alternative PRU settings. Mark, I just wanted to check my understanding of one comment you made. It was in relation to the supplementary grant, which in part was to meet unforeseen pressures such as energy costs. And as we clarified, mainstream schools receive that kind of baked into the funding, and this is separate. You made a comment about the shifting landscape and that now an energy cap has been announced, and that you would factor the, I'm assuming, benefit of that into the amounts special schools and AP receive. That would make the position inequitable in that, if my understanding is correct, in that mainstream schools received a supplementary grant excluding the benefit of the cap. I took an inference from you that you were looking to provide supplementary funding after the cap. So can you clarify what the intention is there, please? And
Yeah,
apologies
okay,
if I've misunderstood.
No, that's fine. So as part of the mainstream schools, as you know, it's a certain amount of monetary sums across a number of factors determining your overall mainstream schools funding value. As I'm aware, there's not a huge amount of science behind that. It's a notion allocations for then schools to meet unforeseen costs. Some of those unforeseen costs could be significant in some schools, maybe down to the building size or indeed a number of teachers, TAs, etc. So it is an amount that schools are being given to manage such costs in the year. What we've got in, which is more of a luxury in the sense of special schools and APs, we've actually got a funding formula that's built up by zero-based budgeting. So we've at Lincolnshire, it's actually Lincolnshire's formula, as opposed to the national funding formula, which is a centralised arrangement, as Liz has referred to. It's based on averages and then redistribution of monies and monies added on top. What we've got here in Lincolnshire for the specials and APs is actually that being built upon costs. So what we're doing is then we're working with the sector, including your own trust, in terms of understanding what those type of costs are that you're seeing in certain areas. Therefore, we can then build them into the formula going forward. So there's an element of robustness behind that. So it's about identifying those costs based on, which also includes potential government changes. But then we can then add that into the formula. So there's that longevity and there's that financial sustainability within that formula to support your schools going forward. So that's where it is. And there's more of a level of sophistication regarding the formulas, as opposed to what we're seeing as a national arrangement, which is more sort of high level. So hopefully that provides some context, and we are sort of talking sort of different arrangements in terms of funding, but what we're aiming to achieve in terms of the special schools and the AP is funding what we would consider reasonable costs to meet those unforeseen arrangements. So supporting that financial sustainability. Ultimately, that's what the formula is there for.
Okay, thanks all. If there are no further questions on this paper, then I propose that we have considered the contents and made our comments. So if anyone disagrees, can you put so in the chat? But I'd like to propose that we have now considered that paper fully. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lizzie. Right, we'll now move on to item number 6, which is the de-delegation of maintained primary school budgets. It's on pages 25 and 38 of the pack. Now, there will be some requirement on our maintained primary school reps at the end of this paper to agree the proposals. So this is purely around those people representing maintained schools, so either head teachers or governors. We're looking at agreeing the proposals for de-delegation of reserves, and also to agree the de-delegation budgets for 23-24 and 24-25 in principle. So over to you, Mark, for the next one.
Okay, thank you. So the Department for Education previously introduced radical funding reforms, whereby additional funding had to be allocated out to schools through their delegated budgets. However, as part of these changes, there was an allowance for the delegation of some services supporting those maintained schools. And the government has allowed this arrangement within the national funding formula. In terms of key features of the arrangement, only maintained primary and secondary mainstream schools can have funds de-delegated. Academies are therefore unaffected as part of this. The decision to de-delegate funds for maintained schools should be considered and voted upon each sector separately. And in terms of a matter of principle as well, any underspends that arise in the de-delegations, as a point of principle and fairness, be earmarked for the benefit of maintained schools only. So reflecting back in the financial year 21-22, in the middle of page 26, what we have is a couple of a summary of the position, of which in 21-22, the contingency budgets related to termination of employment costs for schools in financial difficulties and exceptional unforeseen costs. And there was also a budget for ethnic minority and traveller education team. No funds were de-delegated for maintained secondary schools. In terms of the overall financial position at March 2022, the cumulative underspend was £1,027,000. This includes funding relating to additional one-off school advisor support fund of £260,000, which was there to support the council's statutory duties for improvement of for school improvement services to maintain schools, and this money was supported by the council. You'll remember this time last year, Maintain Primary Schools supported the proposal to commit 301,000 of this underspend to support primary schools responding to the pandemic and addressing the learning needs of children who have been most disadvantaged as a result. So the LA has launched this term a 2-year programme, and that paragraph, second paragraph on page, from the bottom on page 26 details that. In terms of the context as well, I think it's important to emphasise that in terms of children in Lincolnshire are performing less well than the majority of the peers nationally, and hence one of the reasons for putting this additional support in place. Although the gap is narrowing in reading and maths against national, and our more positive position against our neighbours locally. So the remaining de-delegation balance is 466,000 as of March 2022. The de-delegation service underspent by 166,000. The largest underspend being the termination of employment costs. I think this was largely down to the pandemic, schools focusing on the recovery, the additional grants that they received from that. But obviously, in light of general discussions, potentially there may be a draw on this budget going forward. So there are a number of variables within the de-delegation budgets, and they can be seen on page 27. And so the budgets do vary in year, but also they are demand-led as well. So they are there if more schools go into financial deficits and require staffing structures, changes, or indeed rapid intervention and support in terms of their performance. So that's why it's very important to keep that element of flexibility. So in terms of moving on to the current financial year, in the middle of page 27, you can see there the contingency and the ethnic minority per pupil amounts that are deducted from maintained primary school budgets. And Appendix 1 details those services to give a good idea in terms of the value and the support that they provide to the sector, particularly the most vulnerable. So in terms of the 23-24 proposals, you're fully cited, and it was something that was shared with the forum last year regarding the department's decision to end the local authority school improvement and monitoring and brokering grant that supports maintained schools. This was quite a significant impact on the council, and the council strongly objected to these. To provide some perspective, that grant value was estimated to be 585,000 in 22-23, and the overall cost of the school improvement service being just over 1.1 million, the additional element being met by council funding. The department has pressed ahead with that, and in the current year, the grant reduced by 50%, and then in 23-24, the grant will cease entirely. The DfE's position is that funding shortfall should be met by maintained schools, dedelegations. So overall, the council considers its investment in the education sector as a priority and supports the continuation of the current approach of strategic system leadership across all schools and the direct work with maintained schools, which is considered a lean school improvement model. Clearly, the council have managed the 50% reduction in the current year, but unfortunately, there is no sustainable option on that going forward. The local authority has reviewed opportunities for general efficiencies and smarter working within both the strategic system leadership and our statutory responsibilities for maintained schools for implementation from 23-24. The council does not agree with the DfE solution of maintained schools bearing the additional financial burden. Therefore, the council considers it's an opportune moment to review existing delegation budgets with an option of repurposing to support the direct work with maintained primary schools. The council considers the education locality leads and the role they play in the support, monitoring, challenge and expertise to be the priority for maintained primary school improvement, which was previously funded via the grant. Obviously, the schools landscape continues to evolve. Therefore, it's important that the dedelegations are responsive to this. Also to flag that the requirements for a school improvement head teacher service is no longer required from 23-24, and therefore this is why then having a look at repurposing the funds was something that was indeed an option. So the LA continues to propose the operating model of a hybrid model with capacity provided by the central team for the universal maintained primary schools, including those schools in financial difficulties whereby they can actually access the maintained intervention fund. So that will be there, proposed to be there for 23-24. It is proposed that the current contingent rate of £29.23 per pupil continues in 23-24, which was applied in the current year. And also the remaining budget of the MTET service, which is there to fund the staffing costs and requires a fixed budget, will also be proposed to continue going forward. So the table, the section near the bottom of page 29, you can see there the breakdown of those budgets being the termination of employment costs, 150,000, the primary maintained locality lead and the intervention fund being 543, and then the additional intervention locality lead support, which was agreed by the Schools Forum this time last year, of 90,000, and then the MTEP service. These budget figures are indicative, and these will be obviously subject to the October 2022 census. This is as merely indicative for illustrative purposes. So for 24-25, again, it's seeking Schools Forum support in terms of the continuation, albeit we will be required to come back to the Schools Forum for ratification, but it's a seeking in principle agreement from 24-25 also. So the outcomes from the decision made by maintained primary representatives of the Schools Forum will be reflected in the maintained primary school budgets from 23-24. So in conclusion, the local authority is seeking support on committing remainder of the reserves, but also the commitments relating to the budgets for 23-24. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Any questions for Mark on that one? Obviously, this one will need to go to a vote, which will be open to our maintained colleagues. Just keep my eye on the chat. Okay, if there are no questions, then I think what will be. Oh, sorry, Catherine Stratton.
Sorry, Gavin, I couldn't get my button to work. I do apologise. I'm not sure it's a question, but yeah, I just want to say really, where does the quality assurance impact measures of
the investment that is being delegated to these funds, where does that accountability and impact measure lie? And do we evaluate these decisions on that impact of that expenditure? And what would the education team's medium to long-term strategy be for these teams when funding's being cut? Does the local authority have a medium to long-term vision for the support for maintained schools, especially as that number of schools will maybe reduce and can't be sustained? So I don't know if there is an answer, but that's, I think, my contribution.
Thanks, Catherine. I'll answer the second part, and maybe Martin could maybe come in on the first part in terms of the accountability and ensuring the effectiveness of that. So the local authority is fully supportive of maintained schools in terms of the delivery and in terms of the outcomes. That has never changed throughout this changing landscape. And also the local authority is, as it alluded to in the paper, about that strategic support to schools generally. That is something that the local authority see as a key part of its function, and council funding is there to support that arrangement. So that's something that, in terms of education, that's something it is one of our local authority key priorities as in terms of our one council approach. Martin, did you want to pick up the accountability element?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Catherine, for your question. So in terms of quantum of impact, I think it's worthwhile considering internally that we report to a number of different boards around the impact of our work with maintained schools, and that includes the form of Ofsted ratings and making sure that we intervene and support maintained schools to be good, or if they are not good, try and recover that level of performance quickly. I think there's also something around feedback from our schools. So maintained schools on the whole are very appreciative and supportive of the support, monitor and challenge. And in terms of the long-term view, Catherine, whilst there's a maintained school, there is an expectation that we would still conduct our statutory duties to support, monitor and intervene if we had matters for causing concern. You're quite right. As the ground shifts and schools academise, join multi-academy trust, that quantum of funding to support that piece of work will change and ebb and flow. And between myself, finance colleagues and schools forum, we would look to continue to manage and mitigate some of that. I think for the purposes of today's discussion and paper was hopefully reflecting how we've revisited the current delegations and not put a new burden onto our maintained schools, but looked to restructure and reformulate with minimal cost to continue that service to our maintained schools, so that maintained schools are supported and protected and have the choice in their future direction. But it will be subject to review. It will have to be subject to review yearly at least. Did that answer all of your points, Catherine?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you.
I suppose part of what Catherine's kind of alluding to really is that as a forum, we don't necessarily see the feedback, the positive feedback that you're receiving from schools, and yet we're asking for maintained colleagues to make a decision about whether that's right to continue that support or whether something different should be done. So maybe just a point for further down the road or for the next time this one comes round about whether there is any kind of short data metrics, etc., that might go to suggest that, you know, to support those maintained colleagues in saying, well, actually, yeah, the rest of the sector that are maintained schools really appreciate this, really value this, it's necessary. We can then have that kind of confirmation to kind of say, yes, let's go ahead. But at the minute, it's that they don't have that, you know, that's internal to you guys. So I think that's kind of what you're getting at, Catherine. Is that right?
Absolutely. And like our information that comes to the forum, and I understand the weight of responsibility that lies on us. But when, as we've just talked about, budgets being very restricted, that burden just feels heavier each time. And without that evidence, it is difficult to say, I like my locality lead and it's great for my school. But I don't know how many schools in strategy have come out of strategy. I don't know whether that part of the service to those schools bounce back in again within a 6, 12, 18-month period. I don't know how it and obviously being on the board LLPB, maybe I should. So maybe that's something else to reflect on. But yeah, I think it is that evidence decision that weighs heavy on few of us, and I've been looking down the list to see if there's any other maintained leaders here, and I'm not sure, so I'm just feeling it a bit heavier, I suppose, with the cost of living and budgets and things. So thank you, I appreciate your summary of that, Gavin. That's exactly what it was. Thank you.
Martin.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. So in terms of summary of impact, I think what's worthwhile saying, if I recap on the last 12 months, the work of strategy and locality leaders led to more maintained schools maintaining good than in the past, but also we've seen a number of requires improvement schools return back to good in the last 3 months, which is really pleasing. And it has meant that no maintained schools have gone to the inadequate category within the last 12 months. So I would just kind of put that as a key line, that work has avoided any maintained schools going to inadequate, if that gives you a level of reassurance in brief.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Right, with nothing else in the chat then, I just want to say that, the recommendations towards our maintained primary school reps are to agree the proposals for the de-delegation reserves, agree the de-delegation budgets for 23-24 and those in principle for 24-25. So I propose that we've done that. Are everybody in favour that we've done that? And then we'll need to go to a vote of our primary maintained colleagues. So if I can ask Tom to carry out a vote for us, please.
Yep, so for or against the recommendation, Alan Howe.
For, with the caveat that the other colleagues have raised about the lack of impact evidence, but for.
Tony Stevens.
For.
Catherine Stratton.
Yeah, for, thank you.
And Callum Clay.
For, thank you.
I believe that's all primary maintained representatives. So
thank you.
That carries.
Yeah, that carries. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to all those primary colleagues as well. Moving on to item 7, which is revised school budgets for 22-23. I think we're back again with Mark. We are, I think, asked to do quite a bit on this one. So, we're looking at noting the contents of the report, agreeing the 0.78 million of funding that's going to be capitalised for childcare sufficiency purposes, support the local authorities' proposed use of uncommitted sums, and then pass on any comments as well to the Executive Councillor. So I'll let you go through all that, Mark, and I'm sure there'll be questions at the end of this one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So the Dedicated Schools Grant is a ring-fence grant, can only be spent for the purposes outlined within the Department of Schools and Early Years finance regulations. A revision of the schools budget is necessary each year to reflect the 21-22 position. Under the DfE regulations, underspends are carried forward automatically to the following financial year, and the local authority must consult with the Schools Forum over its planned use, which is what we're doing here today. For those LAs with overspends, under Schedule 2 of the Early Years and Finance regulations, local authorities are required to carry forward overspends to their DSG to be dealt with in the new year or future years. This is subject to DfE oversight and to ensure those overspends are recovered in a timely manner. LAs with DSG deficits are required to hold the DSG deficits in a separate reserve within local authority accounts. This statutory override currently is in place, does not require local authorities to make provisions from its general reserves to cover any DSG deficits that exist. However, it is unclear at this stage what the position will be for 23-24 since it expires at the end of this year. This is being referred to in the context of the increasing number of local authorities who are incurring a deficit on their overall DSG, largely due to overspends on their high needs block. Referring to the government's SEND green paper, it identified that 2/3 of local authorities are in a deficit or had been in a deficit by the end of 2021, valued at over 1 billion. So it shows the scale and significance of the challenges. The SEND Green Paper acknowledged the unsustainable system and spending still outstripping funding, which is what the Green Paper was there to try and realise as well in terms of managing that. To support LAs with the largest deficit balances, the DfE launched a safety valve programme in 2021 with agreed financial support. The first one of those first 5 local authorities, that was worth 97 million. This has since expanded in last year and the current year to manage some of those overspends down. As part of the agreed action and signing up to that, they're required to move towards a more sustainable system and stop deficits growing. So appropriate managing demand and appropriate and cost-effective provision is basically what is required from that. The department have launched a programme supplementing this, which is the delivering better value in SEND, of which 55 local authorities are part of that, with less severe but do have deficit issues as part of their high needs system and spending. So local authorities such as Lincolnshire must ensure careful management of the DSG takes place to avoid overspending of the DSG. Clearly, we're not in that financial position, but prudence is necessary. On page 41, it identifies the cumulative underspend carried forward at March 2022, which was 11.9 million, before accounting for existing commitments of 4.3 million and the uncommitted sum being 7.6, which represents just over 1% of the overall DSG. This position reflects the net underspend of 3.2 million on budgets in 21-22, and details can be seen in Appendix A, which is starting on page 47. I will just go to page 47, if I may, just to pick out some major variances. So the presentation of this is by blocks, so there's 4 blocks, which you'll be aware of. But drawing out the significant ones is one in the high needs block, which was the high needs top up and targeted funding. So this is the allocations of EHC funding to the mainstream schools. A 2.847 million overspend. Although the SEND programme, it continues to have a positive impact in supporting children and reducing that upward demand based on the do nothing line, there continues to be a growing trend in Lincolnshire and indeed nationally as well. So therefore, the Green Paper is there to try and support that, but obviously that will take time to see what changes will be made. So that was quite a significant overspend, of which the local authority rebased the work on that in terms of setting budgets and reviewing those trajectories. The other one was the alternative provision, which related to the new free school funding. This is considered a temporary underspend, with the department only funding, only required to fund an element of those places, which is then resulting in a 1.6 million underspend. There was also underspend within the post-16 with learning difficulties and disabilities as a result of the change. So the element 2 funding for places above the purchase places that we agree each year with the department, element 2, which is the from a school's perspective, is that notional that £6,000 notional amount. They're reviewed on a case by case as per the guidance. Another area of underspend, which were temporary underspends, related to the Healthy Minds contract, which is match funded via the high needs block. Those costs were fully met by the outbreak management grant, and portage costs, which are which are delivered by our special school colleagues, was funded through the public health grant in that year, but they were temporary. And also just to flag in terms of the 3- and 4-year-old budgets, which is the early years participation, it underspent by 2.1% of the budget. This is a volatile and demand-led budget. It was impacted by the pandemic, but now we're starting to see numbers rise We're currently monitoring that position because, as I say, because of the annual snapshots, we could be seeing shortfalls, particularly in certain terms. So we'll be monitoring. We're keeping in monitoring that arrangement. So then moving back to page 41, looking at those existing commitments, a thorough review of existing commitments has taken place and has been updated. They can be their total 4.3 million, and they're detailed on page 50. I'm sorry, if we could just go back to page 50 and I'll talk through those. So the first one is the former early years disadvantaged 2-year-old funding, and what I'll talk about shortly is that 780,000 of that original amount, of which the 200,000 is the remaining sum, is proposed to be capitalised, and I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. Then moving on to sector-led, as you'll be aware, this amount has been here for a while, and this is currently with the Lincolnshire Learning Partnership Board in terms of considering the options of how this money could be used in light of the current landscape and challenges within the sector. So a report will be coming back to the Schools Forum on this. We then have £1 million for the school reorganisations that take place. So this is to support those planned growth through whether that's permanent or temporary school expansions to meet the local authority's statutory duty. The LA is funded on a lag basis in terms of growth, so it's sound financial planning to prudently earmark this funding. A drawdown of 346,000 was necessary in 21-22, responding to school places for September 21 after the budgets were set to avoid the schools block overspending. So it's proposed to put that back up to £1 million. Then we have the SEND strategy. So you'll be fully cited on this. This is the change, the capital investment strategy in supporting increase in place numbers amongst our special schools and move to all need education as well. This is the revenue element to support the fixtures and fittings, but also the actual pupil-led arrangements due to the lagged funding arrangements on that. Spending for the current and next year expected to be circa £1 million, and the final schemes of the 14 special schools programme is intended to be completed by 24-25. So that is committed. And then finally, I will just pick up the medical needs strategies. That was a new approach that was introduced in September 21 to fulfil our statutory duty to make arrangements for children and people who are unable to access school because of ill health. So funding has been earmarked for 3 years, allowing for a transition into base budget. Okay, so I'll revert back to the main body of the paper. So in terms of the proposed developments, so the LA is seeking to utilise DSG funding to contribute towards creating new places in the county for sufficiency place sufficiency reasons. The LA is proposing to capitalise 780,000 from the DSG reserve, which has previously been earmarked, as I referred to, within the early years initiatives commitment of 977,000. The LA must report annually on how we are meeting our statutory duty for childcare sufficiency to ensure sufficient places exist within the county. To ensure that LAs meet this childcare sufficiency duty, there are areas in Lincolnshire requiring additional childcare places in the immediate future. A development plan has been produced, however, capital investment will be required to support that plan. The LA has exhausted all previously DFE capital funding for early years and has an available balance on its capital budgets of 40,000. And indeed, reflecting on the council's capital programme, we've seen significant increases in costs, and by illustration, in terms of the level of inflation for all works construction was at 24.5% in April 2022 compared to the prior year, and this has since increased over the following months as well. It just shows the scale of demand on that. So in terms of the LA's recommendation is to capitalise 780,000 of DSG revenue funding This will require a disapplication request to the DFE for Secretary of State approval. So as part of the Schools Forum paper here, the Schools Forum is asked to support the recommending, and a vote will be taking place to do that. So in terms of the proposal for the use of the uncommitted sum, so the uncommitted sum is 6.8 million. Well, as alluded to previously in the paper, the financial challenges and the uncertainty that exist within the DSG, particularly the high needs block. So the LA proposes the remaining sum is not committed and held in reserves due to the current spending levels in the area of special educational needs and the uncertainty going forward. And in the context of what I previously alluded to, 2/3 of local authorities in deficits valued at over £1 billion. Lincolnshire's underspending in 21-22 of 1.9 million. However, had temporary funding not been sourced and the alternative provision of free school monies not been achieved, the high needs block would have been in a deficit position. So Lincolnshire's transformation work, which I know you received a report in June on the annual SEND paper. That shows the good work that's going on and the improved outcomes, and also the move to try and ensure that it becomes a sustainable offer financially within the available funding. The funding that we're receiving in 23-24, again, is welcomed in terms of a 5% funding floor increase on per head of population. However, we must be mindful of the protection funding that Lincolnshire receives of 8.6 million. And the implications of a changing financial regime as a result of the Green Paper. So it's really keeping a watching brief on this. Lincolnshire's desire to achieve a balanced budget on its high needs block in terms of delivering the right activities and cost effectiveness of provision is central to our strategy. And we feel that the reserves, management of the reserves, enabling time to implement plans is a key priority for us. There remains other financial risks within the DSG, and they can be seen on the bullet points on page 44, and of which we have plans in place to manage those. So in summary, Lincolnshire remains in a strong financial position to respond to the demands, and the high needs will continue to require careful and prudent management. The LA proposes that the remaining sum is not committed and held in reserves due to the future outlook, and obviously the tighter financial arrangement going forward. So I'll hand back to yourself, Gavin, in terms of the main vote on the capitalisation.
Thanks, Mark. Questions, Steve? I don't know if you want to come in and ask your question, please.
Yeah, I've just put it in the chat, Mark. Nice to see you. I'll just read in the alternative provision underspend. Are you able to give any reasons for that? Because most of my colleagues' principals indicate that they'd like access to increased provision for some of their pupils.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so Lincolnshire received capital funding, or capital funding was sought, and 4 free schools were introduced across the county. And as part of the DFE arrangements for supporting the startup of AP free schools, they fund the first 2 years of place funding. And so those 2 years have since passed. However, what the DFE use in terms of a criteria, they only, at the moment, the current arrangements is that they only pick up the costs for those that are actually main role, not dual role. So as part of the overall placements of AP, there's 252 placements across Lincolnshire Springwell, which are our four AP schools. Of which I think it's 87 of those are actually on main role. So only 87 multiplied by 10,000, it actually gets clawed back rather than the 2.5 million that was budgeted for. I anticipate that to potentially change in the past going forward, but at this moment in time, it is prudent for us to budget for the amount where in terms of the full amount, but obviously at the moment in terms of the DFE criteria, in terms of their methodology, it's only picking up the main pupils rather than dual registered as well.
Thanks very much, Mark.
Any further questions for Mark on that one before we move towards a vote? Just the two questions from Josh, I think.
Just the two. Thank you. First one's just about the proposed capitalisation mark. Given the volatility in the construction market, if there were to be any increased costs of those schemes, would you be coming back to seek further capitalisation, or would those costs be met from elsewhere? So I suppose it's a question about confidence in that spend level.
Yeah, so in terms of the current commitments and the identifying that sum of 780,000, it does actually build in the inflation assumptions. So we have been monitoring those department inflation. So there has been work in terms of determining what those will be basing on the 25% increase. So it has built in those assumptions. One would hope that we would have flexibility within that to try and help us manage it not only as an immediate issue, but also in the short term as well. But no, we've built in those assumptions for inflation within that amount.
Thank you, that's reassuring. And then very quickly, it's a broader question. The unspent balances on the high needs block, understanding that need for prudence, you know, and Lincolnshire is in a much stronger position than many. So understanding that, we've talked a lot today about the unforeseen and potentially quite, hopefully, short-term extraordinary costs schools and specialist settings are facing. I wonder, has the council considered using some of those unspent monies to smooth the impact of this period for specialist provision? So actually investing some of that one-off so that special schools and APs don't make really substantial staffing cuts, which then prove to have been kind of too deep in the long term and impacting adversely on children's experiences. You know, is there an opportunity to use some of that money to avoid that happening?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Josh. That's a fair point. So what as part of the supplementary funding allocation, that is basically what we're trying to do from that fund rather than the actual reserves itself. Noting that the supplementary funding is being baselined within the high needs block. And these costs are not costs that can be switched off by schools. For example, the pay awards and things like that. They're a cost that a school will have to incur from year to year. So it's about baselining those costs. So as part of the formula, it's built up. It's got a very much a thoroughness behind it. It's very much open and engaged with the sector on what those costs are, and indeed these new costs. So what we'll be looking to do, meeting all reasonable costs within the actual formula itself. So as part of this supplementary funding and 23-24 allocations, it's about putting in that formula those quantifying those increases and actually build it into the formula to enable schools to plan for the long term, not an injection of one-off monies to hopefully push back the issue. Actually, it's about supporting schools for the longer term. So the supplementary funding, for me, that is the purpose of what you're describing there, about giving the additional costs, or understanding those additional costs and allocating monies to support those, which are then part of your base budget planning.
Thank you. Let's hope there's a big supplementary pot. Thank you, Mark.
And I suppose there's a challenge around the timeliness of that as well, because, you know, schools and special schools will be looking at, you know, potential natural wastage and be saying we're not going to re-recruit to positions where people move on because they don't have the funding, and then they don't want to then suddenly get supplementary funding come in as they've just seen somebody walk out the door. So I suppose that reflects Keena's point from earlier on around, you know, how timely that can come in. So if there isn't any more questions, what we'll do is we'll move on to a vote on this. So we were asked to note the contents. We were asked to consider the capitalisation. We were asked to support the proposal for the uncommitted sum, and I think I propose that we've kind of considered all those things now, and we've raised our questions. So now we move on to a requiring someone just to second that. So we propose that we've done all those things. Can someone just second that for me?
Well, happy to second it, Chair. Alan.
Thank you, Alan. And then we'll move on to a vote where we'll be asking people to state either for, against or abstain after Tom calls your name. So it'll be a full roll call, I'm afraid, because everyone, all school forum members are required to pass comment on this one. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. Amy Stanton.
Q4.
Tina Adkins.
Abstain with the comments made earlier.
Alan Howe.
For.
Tony Stevens.
For.
Catherine Stratton.
For.
Alan Clay.
For.
Michelle Anderson.
For.
Rachel Barrett.
For.
Joe Slessor.
For.
Professor Ken Durans.
For.
Steve Baragwana.
For.
Francis Green.
For.
Simon Pickett.
For.
Gavin Booth.
For.
Lee Mason.
Abstain, linking to earlier comments.
Josh Greaves.
Abstain, thank you.
Julia Merivale.
Abstain.
Peter Tomlinson.
Abstain.
Thank you. That is 13 in favour and 5 abstentions. That carries, Chairman.
Thank you very much, and thank you to those people that have stuck to their principles. I think that's really, what we're here for, rather than just to agree and wave everything through. I think it's really important that people share what they really think, otherwise it doesn't work. Right, moving on to item number 8, which is children with disabilities, early support learning provision, pages 57 to 60. Hopefully we've got Rosemary Ackroll, Senior Commissioning Officer, there she is, with us. So we're asked to listen to the report and then look at the recommendations to support the funding going forward. So I'll go to you, Rosemary, and then we'll come back for questions afterwards. So thank you.
Thank you. Children's Commissioning Team, we've carried out a full review of commission services for children with disabilities, namely targeted positive activities for 5 to 18-year-olds and domiciliary care for 0 to 18-year-olds, both of which the council pay for out of their core budget. What we're here today to speak about is the early support and learning provision that is commissioned for 0 to 5-year-olds, which is funded via the Dedicated Schools grant. The supplier works to the Early Years Foundation stage curriculum, with our early years specialist teachers auditing and monitoring delivery to help close the attainment gap between children with disabilities and their mainstream peers, working towards as many children as possible being able to fully access mainstream provision. This targeted service helps to avoid children with disabilities needs from escalating, preventing more costly support and provision from specialist early years settings, specialist schools and children's services. Work has already begun to look at ways in which to integrate the delivery of the early years, early support provision targeted sessions together with the mainstream Best Start offer that you will have heard in an earlier Schools Forum paper earlier in the year that is offered, both are offered in children's centres across the county. There will be expectations out of that work within both new specifications for suppliers to comply with. So we're here today to ask for the Schools Forum approval to continue the same level of delivery for the early support learning provision. That is 13 sessions a week out of 11 children's centres across the county, with an inflationary uplift of 2% over 5 years. That's an increase of £6,524 a year, therefore now an annual cost of £234,828 per year. for 5 years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rosemary. Anybody got any questions? Can you please indicate so in the chat? I'm very quiet. So the recommendation, I think, is to support the funding of 234,828 per annum from the DSG for the early support learning provision, which takes us from the 1st of October 23 for up to 5 years to the 30th of September 2028. Without anything in the chat, I will propose that we've done that. Does everyone want to agree? Anybody not happy to proceed? Question from Amy Stancer there saying, are there any plans for expansion? So to do more with that service in the future?
Thank you, Amy. This goes back to the point around trying to work in a much more integrated way. What we're trying to do is, rather than put the dependence on having specialist services at such an early age, at 0 to 5, and then almost building an ethos of parents thinking that that's the continued model expectation for their child, we'd like to be able to incorporate the provision more into the mainstream offer that we already have, and that's something that we'll be looking to develop. The key difference between the mainstream offer and this specialist offer is that the early support learning provision for children with disabilities offers an element of respite for the parents, so that the children can actually be left at the session, allowing them to go and do whatever it is that they need the respite for. So we want to unpick that a bit over this contract and understand what that actually looks like for those parents. And so when we talk about wanting to expand it, we do want to expand it, but in a more integrated way to enable more families to be able to take advantage of the specialist offer, whilst other families may be able to be integrated into the mainstream more. Does that answer your question?
I think it was a very full answer. Thank you very much. So, from the lack of anybody dissenting in the chat, we will kind of agree that that moves forward. So thank you very much, Rosemary.
Thank you.
And then we'll move on to our next item, which is item number 9, alternative provision arrangements. That's on pages 61 to 70. Kate Capel, Head of Service for Inclusion, will present. We are noting the contents of this report. So over to you, Kate. Thanks for coming.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Gavin. Good afternoon, everybody. So as Gavin says, this is a paper giving a summary of the alternative provision arrangements that were in place in 2021-22, so the last academic year. The paper sets out that the local authority commissions alternative provision across 3 different areas, so Springwell Academy, across Build a Future for our Key Stage 4, and then also placements at Pilgrim Hospital School in relation to short-term placements for pupils with medical conditions that require a higher level of support than that which the school can provide through reasonable adjustments. Lincolnshire follows the ladder of behavioural interventions that was introduced a while ago now to support settings with meeting pupils' SEMH needs and their behavioural needs. And this continues to be underpinned through support from the pupil reintegration team in relation to training, advice, information, in relation to suspensions and fixed terms exclusions, but also the overseeing of the ladder and maintaining that high quality of process. Really good news that the ladder continues to show that positive impact within Lincolnshire. The take-up of places at alternative provision via the ladder is showing a return to pre-pandemic levels, so it's the numbers. So looking at the data at the top of page 63, it just gives an idea of the take-up of those places and considering where that currently is. There was also a really positive impact from those pupils that have accessed alternative provision through intervention. What we're seeing is that 90% of those pupils had no permanent exclusion a year after the intervention, which is showing really positive impact. However, the paper does go on to detail some of the concerns around the level of SEMH needs and the high level of SEMH needs that we're seeing. And to address those, there is an SEMH strategy being developed in partnership with stakeholders. Page 64 goes into detail around the numbers of permanent exclusions following intervention placements, and that shows the data that drops to about 43% that have a no permanent exclusion, but equally haven't transitioned for a specialist placement after the intervention, so the details are all there. Whilst the ladder continues to demonstrate positive impact, we've ensured that it's up to date and relevant. And at the start of this academic year, the DfE launched or published, two updated documents underpin the ladder, and that's the advice and guidance around exclusions and suspension and how to support that area within schools. So although the ladder's been updated, the fundamental steps haven't changed. It's the information within the ladder that link to the legislation. Regarding support for settings that works alongside the ladder of intervention and the elements supporting schools, the transformation work has further been embedded within the ladder, so accessing tools such as RSAL, the Send Advice Line, which is having a really positive impact, Lincolnshire's Inclusion Toolkit and the Valuing Send assessment tool, all of which are available on Lincolnshire's local offer. Over the summer as well, we retendered the behaviour outreach service, the BOSS, and widened their offer to continue being a key element of the ladder, but equally widened to now offer a universal element to educational settings, particularly around training and development, and also advice and guidance that can then be provided for parents to implement in the home as well, so linking up that support. In regard to exclusions and suspensions, just looked at the data around that on page 65 towards the bottom. What we're able to do, the national picture, looking at the academic year, and it's showing areas around permanent exclusions are slightly higher than the rates nationally and East Midlands, although we have seen it reduced within Lincolnshire. It is showing higher against those other benchmarks. And the rate of suspensions for that academic year, which is 2020-21, sorry, I should have just highlighted, there is a year's lag to the national data due to the way that it's collected. So the rate of suspensions for that year showed that we were below the national and East Midlands levels. However, what we have seen for this past year, where we've looked at our local data, we have seen that there's been a spike in those, and that's detailed a little bit further down in the report. Permanent exclusion-wise, with our local data, it's showing that we're below where we were pre-pandemic, so pre-2017-18, so going back further, again, showing that positive impact of the ladder. Particularly to highlight here, primary schools have kept some really good figures there, as you'll see from the data on page 66. Secondary schools, we've seen they're hovering between the 2017 and 2018 and 2018-19 figures, but that's all broken down in the report. What we have seen this last academic year, which I just touched upon, is around suspensions, is we have seen quite a significant spike this last year, and that has seen an increase of between 2,000 and 2,500 more than we saw in pre-pandemic numbers. And approximately half, 49% of those, are down to persistent disruptive behaviour. And certainly it's information we've been sharing at the recent leadership briefings around how we can use those suspensions so that they are a key part of behavioural policies, but then looking at where the repeated use of suspensions, how it could be unpicked to look at what the underlying behaviour is, and if there's anything further that can be put in place to support the pupils rather than that suspension if it's not being effective. Further areas of work this last year, we saw the introduction of the emotional-based school avoidance, or what we call EBSA pathway. This was launched to support schools and other stakeholders with elements around where attendance is compromised because of that anxiety and emotional-based school avoidance. That has been firmly embedded throughout this last year. We saw the introduction of the EBSA caseworkers that sit within the PRT team, and they're offering a wide range of training and support around this area. And the pathway supports school settings with clarity around steps to take to meet this area of need. We've seen a positive impact in this initial year. We're continuing to review that very carefully and looking how we can further enrich, embed and support settings with that really robust and proactive support. And then finally, it's been mentioned a few times, but obviously we've got that Send AP Green Paper that was consulted on over the summer. The consultation ended on the 22nd of July. Our understanding from the DFE is that they've had, not surprisingly, a vast number of responses, and they're going through those at the moment to form their next step in the Green Paper. And as a local authority, whilst we're proactively supporting this area of need, we'll ensure that we remain very much aware of those developments to ensure that as we go forward, they're heading in the right direction. So in conclusion, we're seeing a positive impact from the ladder and also from our AP provision, and the EBSA pathway has also seen that positive start this last academic year, and the pupil instigation team are providing that robust support along with a wide range of other elements of support to ensure this area continues to be met going forward. Thank you. Any questions?
Right, I can see Steve's put something in the chat there. The increase in suspensions and exclusions reflects anecdotal information that he's gathered from colleagues regarding pupils' adjustment to behavioural norms on return from lockdown and COVID. Is there a need for an increased number of AP placements in the short term while these adjustments take place?
Yeah, thank you for that, Stephen. Actually, I was going to lead into your earlier comment. I believe you asked of Mark around your colleagues and take-up of AP. I agree, the leadership briefings that we've just finished have had a lot of anecdotal information around what could be the reason for that spike, but certainly I would agree with that anecdotal that it's seeing that supporting pupils returning to a school environment and a far more structured environment than they perhaps have accessed whilst they were in the home accessing education. What I would say, at the moment, we're not seeing a need to increase those number of AP places. As shown in the paper, there is still capacity within those places, within the commission places that is available for pupils. So I would be encouraging that for your colleagues that you mentioned that would like to access that alternative provision, there is capacity there. I've got no concerns about that at the moment. It is there, and obviously the ladder of intervention can support that going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. Keena, please.
Hi, Kate. I just wanted to say the EBSA programme, certainly from our perspective, is really good. So just advocating the success of that. We've had a really good example of the effectiveness of it, of a pupil returning after a significant period of time through that programme. So that's great. And the other thing is, I know that BOSS Services just had a retender, which is great for the service. I know that it's a demand that's very difficult to meet with the number of mainstream schools that are struggling with behaviours at the moment. At a head teachers meeting yesterday, we were very keen collectively to support the local authority, with our expertise in working with children with challenging behaviours. And I know myself, I've been asked to put a proposal together to be able to release my staff to be able to go into mainstream schools, particularly within a locality, to support. We're very, very keen to support as a collective, if there can be some work around how we can release our staff in terms of that financial managing. We're not trying to gain money, just manage that release of those staff. We're very keen to support as a collective. So because if we don't do it now, it will get worse, I'm sure.
absolutely, Keena. Really valid points, and thank you for raising those. And obviously that links up with the work that we're doing together around that transition element, partly around the SEMH and supporting settings around SEMH, but also around that revolving door. So supporting those pupils who've accessed some specialist provision for a period of time and no longer require that level of specialism, and supporting those learners with returning to a mainstream setting to go forward. So yeah, absolutely, you'll continue to link with yourself, Keena, and through the wider groups that we've got with specialist with the special schools to see how we can take that forward. But yeah, really value your input on that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Steve just come up with a follow-up comment that, you know, obviously good to hear about the capacity, but anecdotally again, hearing that some people are struggling to access it, and you know, we'd have to have a. I'm sure it's a continual reminder to people about the process that needs to be going through to access that. But I know that it's not, you know, it's not always quick and it's not always easy to kind of get through that process. So, but it is nice to hear that there are spaces available if and when that's been worked through. So thank you. Right, we're just noting that report. So thank you, Kate. If anybody's got anything they would like to dissent on that, let me know. Otherwise, we'll say thank you very much. Right. Thank you, Kate. We'll move on then. We're on to item 10, and it's that old favourite of the Academies and Trust update. We're going to ask Lizzie to present this for us. And again, it's an item for noting as per usual. Thanks, Lizzie.
Thank you. So, as we said, this is a standard agenda item that provides an update to the forum in terms of the number of academies in Lincolnshire. The position is based on the 1st of September, based on the May 22 census. Since the date of the last report, Leadenham Primary has converted to an academy. The current status of all schools and academies are detailed in the table on pages 71 and 72. Currently, approximately 52% of education establishments are academies, which equates to 72.4% of pupils. There's only one school formally seeking to become an academy at the moment. Therefore, the projected 6-month position is detailed on pages 72 and 73. The next section of the report details the trusts with the highest number of academies and free schools in Lincolnshire, and you can see that the Lincoln Anglican Academy Trust has the highest number with 15. There are 35 multi-academy trusts operating in Lincolnshire. 149 academies are members of multi-academy trusts. 39 academies are standalone single academies and therefore not part of multi-academies. The largest trusts operating nationally with a presence in Lincolnshire are then detailed towards the bottom of page 73. The largest is the Academies Enterprise Trust, which has 56 academies, 2 of which operate in Lincolnshire. The form is asked to note the content of the report.
Thanks, Lizzie. Any comments? We don't normally on that one. It's just nice to kind of hear the update and see, you know, the pace of change, or none at all, if that's what's happening. So if everyone's happy, right, we'll move on to just making you aware of the work programme. Can you just kind of note that and see the items that are due to come up? Has anybody got any comments or queries about those things coming up at the next few meetings? Okay, so we'll look forward to the next meeting, which is on the 19th of January. So just to make you aware, item 12 is future meeting dates. We're meeting together on the 19th of January at 1 o'clock, and the other dates are there. And I'm sure that the Teams meetings will go in your diaries forthwith. But can I just say thank you very much for your comments and discussion this afternoon, and for participation as always. Again, it's challenging times for everyone as we come to considering finances, and we just wait to see what the world looks like when we get here in January. It could be a very different place again. So thank you very much, everybody. And we will see you in January, if not before.